Hey everybody, this is Over the BS. I'm Sadé.
And I am Blair.
And today we have a very special episode because we are over police brutality and we have a very special guest with us. Her name is Haewon. She is a youth advocate and community organizer. And we are so excited to have this talk with you about our community and what's going on right now. I think what we'd like to just kick it off with is Black Lives Matter is a huge movement. It's been going on for years because police brutality is just something that our community's been suffering from for so long. And now we've seen protests across the country and even internationally, and it's massive. And I just want to know from your perspective, has there really ever been anything like this before when it comes to protests and community organizing? Have you seen anything like this?
Me personally, I have not seen anything like this. And let me move.
No worries.
I've lived through a couple of these uprisings. I was, I'm originally from Los Angeles, born and raised. I was about maybe 3.5 years old when the LA 92 uprisings happened, post the Rodney King verdict, where we saw a similar incident of police brutality. We didn't have social media and access to information in the same way. And we also saw this in Ferguson. So in 2014, after the death of Michael Brown, we saw something similar in Ferguson where it really changed the game and how people show up in the streets. And really, what we're seeing right now is really the building blocks of these different uprisings. So I have not seen anything like this. And I think also young people are learning how to organize differently. And we're learning lessons from the movements that came before us. And so we're trying to be creative and do things differently.
Yeah. And why do you think George Floyd's death was the tipping point? Because honestly, it set off a fire. I know when I saw the video, I felt a range of emotions. And I'm not sure if everybody felt these same range of emotions, but I just wonder why, from your view, why it seems like this was a huge tipping point.
I mean, I think it's so many things. We're just living in a really, a time where so much is happening at once. One, we're under a fascist regime that is being led by like open white racism. And I think, this country has tried its best to cloak its agenda and the foundation of this place. And if there is one good thing that happened with the Trump administration, it's this, that he accelerated the movement. People are no longer talking about reform. He really exposed what this place was and took the veil off. And then we're also in a global pandemic. So people are really seeing how capitalism is just not, it's just not working. It's not working.
This is true.
People are, the idea of capitalism is to keep consuming and eat, consuming and taking until you grow. And it's just not a sustainable way for us to live. And so what we're seeing is as we continue to feed money to the military and police state, we're cutting services we're cutting jobs, we're cutting quality education, healthcare. People don't have access to the things that they need to live a quality life. And so they feel like the pandemic exacerbated things. We saw unemployment rise. We saw kids, stuff with childcare, food, worker protections, food security, all of these things. It just happened at once.
I feel like we also got transparency with a lot of these, companies and corporations. Suddenly it was like, wait, how are you treating your employees during the pandemic? They have families too. Are you cutting their pay? If they're not going to be working because they're not essential, are you paying them because they have families? How are you coping with this? And then with this movement, we're like, so are you taking back any of those racist statements you've made in the past? Are you checking your board members? I think you're right to the point that we are not stupid. We are active. And I think our generation and generation below as Gen Z, kind of thrives on like authenticity. And I think that's something maybe that our generation differs a bit from our parents. I feel like sometimes our parents, my parents, they came here from the Caribbean and, they want to they want to like live, and they just want to, get by. And I think the rest of us were like, no, we're trying to thrive here. So we're pushing for much, much more than to just get by. Yeah.
Well, I'm happy that you brought up our racist president, because I just want to know how you felt when he said when he tweeted, when the looting starts, the shooting starts. What did that spark in you to get involved even more? Because I went out that next day to protest, because that fire that he tried to implement fear more in our country. So I just want to know how that made you feel, and maybe whatever you did that day, how did it spark your passion even more?
I don't think it did. I think we have to remember that Trump never switched up. His agenda was clear from the very jump. He opened with his campaign calling Mexicans rapists and killers. And we have seen this time and time again. So I think we need to move from stop giving him the attention of, he's saying something new. He's not saying anything new. Like when I read it, I was like, this is why we need to continue fighting. And I think, this country was built to oppress people of color, particularly Black people. It's on stolen land through enslaved free labor. And so I think we need to stop being surprised about this country doing exactly what it was set up to do, and really push ourselves to start thinking, why have we put up with it for so long?
Yeah, and it seems like we're not putting up with it, especially with this week's election. Can you do you think that the protests and everything that's going on, the spark of George Floyd's death, did that have any responsibility for this week's elections outcome?
I think so. I think I definitely think so. I think young people, I think one thing that makes this moment really different too is that we have access to information, and young people are reclaiming their narratives. Not just young people, people are telling their own stories. So, a lot of what happened in 1992 in LA and in Ferguson was the media totally hijacked the narrative. In 92, we saw that the officers who beat Rodney King after they got their non-indictment and saw no consequences for their actions. We saw that right after they started showing the violence happening in Koreatown, South Central, and I don't know if you remember 15-year-old Latasha Harlan, who was killed by a Korean store owner. And instead of focusing on this police violence that happened, they just kept playing that on loop, on loop, on loop. And the attention quickly got diverted to got diverted, and it became about Korean and Black tension. Same with Ferguson, it became about violence and the looting that was happening versus the death of Mike Brown. And so I think what's happening around this election is people don't trust the system anymore. And people are no longer talking about reform. And I think that's the way that people are thinking past the election. Like we have never, as young people, we have never really experienced a democracy. And so what we're seeing is this, like we're in a civil unrest, people are uprising. And I think it's going to impact what we see in November and how people showed up this week.
Yeah, and the way that you touched on the way the media disseminates some of the the news and how they tell these stories. We're both reporters, so something I kind of pick up on is how some of these reporters shape their questions and kind of shape their stories. And I've seen so many posts, especially from news reporters on their own feeds on Instagram, showing these pictures of police holding embracing protesters and doing the Cupid shuffle with protesters. And I know for me personally, I'm like, stop the propaganda, but I just want to know, what do you make of that from someone who, you followed this so closely? I know personally, I'm just like, I think it needs to go because I think it almost takes away from the narrative, but I'd love to hear if you think we should be showing more peacefulness. Should we be showing the fire as well? Is it all part of this?
I don't watch mainstream media. I do it once in a while, maybe like in the evening. I'll just try to see what the narrative is, so I know how to get on my social. I'm not really a social media organizer, but I've been using my platform to share what I'm seeing and what young people are saying on the streets. And I think that it's really important that we do not let people hijack our movement and co-opt it. And that looks like the media telling false narratives. That looks like the government, folks in government like our mayor and governor kneeling and putting their hands on cops, and promising us these small reforms that we know aren't going to do anything for our people. And I think the biggest thing too is that we have to really check our own privilege, because I think this is a moment of time around like two main questions, which is like who are we willing to fight for, and what are we willing to give up to do that? Because that's a question we all need to ask ourselves in this moment, so we don't end up in the same place we have before.
Yeah.
I'm happy that you brought up earlier about the Rodney King verdict, because being diverted, because it seems like now we're kind of going backwards, where now it's like, for those who haven't received justice, we want it called out. For example, now the charges for Ahmaud Arbery's case, and even the case now with George Floyd, we're starting to see charges pending. But for Sandra Bland and Breonna Taylor, we're not seeing it so much. We know that the investigations are starting to reopen. But can you just kind of speak on the opposite of what's happened in the past, for example, Rodney King versus now?
Can you, like, in what sense? How are you?
Well, in what sense? Just how now is it? Because it's an opposite effect. So just kind of maybe going into, now we're going in the past, trying to reopen to get justice for people who maybe never received or that we didn't see. What outcome do we want to see with maybe those cases as well?
Some of the reopened cases?
Yeah.
I think it's for the movement for Black Lives and Black Lives Matter, our ultimate demand is to defund the police. We want to abolish the police system. And it's complicated, right? I think we as a people have a lot of healing to do around what justice looks like for us. So you'll see people across different chapters and factions and political ideologies that have different ideas of that. And I think just like the protesters on the streets, we have to remember that Black people, organizers, protesters, were not a monolith. And all of us, like all the folks in the streets, the media can paint us as like one giant group, but everyone is there for different reasons. Some folks are fed up of being in their house. Some are trying to agitate, some just like want to feel connected. Some have clear demands. And so I think I can share what justice looks like to me, and that looks like abolition, and really moving into a world where instead of revenge and punishment as our culture of handling pain and violence, we move towards a framework of transformative justice, where we feed our community with the resources, services, and infrastructures that give us the tools to be accountable, to create safety and care for one another. And so I feel like we have a lot of, this country has a lot of things to pay for, and I think as a people, we need to keep having these conversations as what it looks like to all of us.
Yeah, and do you think 8 Can't Wait, that new, kind of proposal that's come out by Campaign Zero? I don't know if you've seen it at all, but 8 Can't Wait is this new campaign that they're saying, if all of these policies are in effect, police violence should go down by 72%. Do you think that's the right type of reform? Do you think it can get us to that end point at all?
No, I think we've tried everything we can, in terms of reforming the police system. So we know, the history, the legacy of police comes from slavery and slave catching, right? And we've seen how we've been told over and over again that we need to be peaceful, and we need to do policy change, and we need to organize. All of us we have seen how our people have done that. From the civil rights movement, we have peaceful protests of people doing sit-ins and direct action and marching. And we saw how they were met with that, right? The repression, the police violence, the dogs, the hose. This is the one thing we learned in school, right? It ends there. Black people are
they didn't tell us after that, huh?
Yeah, they didn't tell us.
There were some riots after that before we got the Civil Rights Act, okay?
Right. And what we saw from that was like Black people coming to terms like, oh, we cannot actually reform this. They're not here to protect us. And so what do we see? We see Black people taking up arms. We see the rise of the Black Panther Party, the Black Liberation Movement. Like, we need to feed each other. We need to teach our children our own history and education. We need to pull up arms because the cops aren't going to protect us, right? Literally creating a world within a world. And how was that met? We were met with, the same thing: police repression, locking up our leaders, flooding our communities with drugs. And now, you know, in the rise of mass incarceration, and now you have us, this new movement of folks that have seen what has happened to our people. And, you know, they tell us if we go to college, if we, you know, get a degree, if we get in positions of power, that we can infiltrate and we can change the system. And now we're in 2020, and we have, you know, more Black millionaires, billionaires. We have more Black people in power, we have more Black people in office. Even President Obama, we had a Black president, and under that Black president, we had the rise of the Black Lives Matter movement.
Mm-hmm.
What are we left to do? We tried putting body cameras on the cops. We talked about, we put money towards training them to like us better, to not see us as evil. So what's left? What's left outside of abolition?
I love that. And I'm happy that you brought up defunding the police too, because I mean, looking at LA, for me personally, I was very disappointed in our mayor when he accepted a $3 billion fund to the LAPD.
Shame,
I know
shame on him. Shame on Eric Garcetti.
Yeah. And for me, I was very, very, very disappointed in him. I was also disappointed that he only gave the African Americans $150 million to give back to our communities, because that's only 5% of what he proposed to LAPD. How does that make you feel? And was that just a slap in the face?
It's a great question. It's funny because that decrease happened with a proposed increase. So, and I mean, Eric Garcetti has never cared about poor people. Like, let's be clear. We know his agenda, especially with all the gentrification and just who he works for. And he's just got, just like Jackie Lacey, our you know, they just
LA district attorney.
Our LA district attorney. It's the same thing as I'm saying. It's the reform. It's giving us crumbs, and the people have spoken. The people have spoken. If you're walking down the street, when you hear on the news, they're like, "Oh, people are out here." Like, I live in Oakland right now. When I was walking down the street the next morning, maybe like it's the second day of the rebellion, just to see what the streets looked like, and when I was reading like just what the messages were on the plaques of different buildings. These buildings weren't like small businesses when I walked around. They were the banks, they were the Targets, they were the corporations. But everywhere you're seeing abolish the police, abolish work, abolish prisons, abolish, OPD. And so it's really clear that people don't know, the police don't care for us. They don't support us. They don't keep us safe. And they're targeting, who they are there to protect. So it's like the community doesn't want the police, but they're literally only here for one reason, and that is to protect corporations, the wealthy elite, and the banks. So
eat the rich.
Right. So it's like, when we talk about abolition, we're really meaning the whole system. Like we can create, we have to use our imaginations. I think one thing that this system has done, our education system, all of these systems that we are under has tried to like capture our imagination as what is possible. So sometimes people go, "Hey, Juan, what do you mean a world without prisons and police?" And I map it out. Like if we see someone sleeping on the streets, like what about like housing that person? If someone is doing drugs, what about a crisis counselor or a drug intervention counselor? Someone, you know what I mean? Like there's so many new jobs we can create. We don't have to think in these boxes anymore. All of this is made up. You know what I mean? So like, take it down and rebuild.
Can you also build that out a little bit more for me? I'd love a little bit of the examples that you gave us, because I think when a lot of people hear defund the police and abolish it, they're like, "Oh my gosh, anarchy," and they think what they've been seeing, on the news with buildings on fire, and it's like, those police almost basically.
Can I read something that I just
posted
that someone shared, and I really, really loved it, and I would love to share it with y'all.
Please.
And it was, I got this off of Instagram just to give credit, and it's from Feminista. And it says, "Some folks are sleeping on benches in the park. Imagine a city employee comes by and checks in to see if they need a place to sleep, food, water, or healthcare. An hour later, those who want a different place to sleep have one. Someone is behaving erratically. Imagine texting a number and an unarmed urgent responder trained in behavioral mental health comes in 5 minutes. An hour later, that person is safe and getting the support they need. A youth is selling drugs. Imagine they're connected to a substance use service that intervenes in drug interactions. later that youth is supported with healthy outcomes. The seller takes accountability for their harm. Do you want me to keep going?
Keep going.
I mean,
Great.
I'm loving this. Please, please.
Yes,
Oh, a
yes,
word.
there's a
Let's
couple
map it
more.
out for people. Let them know what
Yes.
we could have.
I saw this morning and I'm so glad I'm sharing it. Someone is talking to themselves on the bus. Imagine they ride the bus without being bothered.
Ooh.
An hour later, they are at their destination and they're going about their day. You're experiencing a mental health crisis and afraid. Imagine you call 311 and a first responder trained in mental health comes to your door. 1 hour later, you are in a safe place with your consent, with plans for follow-up care. Someone seems to be snooping in your car windows on your block. Imagine calling your neighbors who are trained in self-defense and de-escalation and approaching that person. An hour later, the conflict is resolved, the person is responsible, and they're getting the support that they need. Your friends are intoxicated and fighting, but you don't want to get them in trouble. Imagine calling 311 and a crisis intervention team comes to your door. 1 hour, your friends are sleeping it off at home. You don't realize, but your brake lights aren't working. Imagine a city employee signals for you to pull over and says, hey, how about I replace those lights for you right here so no one gets hurt? An hour later, both lights work and you're at home. Last one. Incidents of gun violence are rising in the neighborhood. Imagine a trauma-informed crisis intervention team works with community activists to disarm and de-escalate conflicts. People doing harm are connected to services that address the underlying problem. That's what public safety looks like.
I love that.
Yeah, I love that too. It completely diminishes, in the percentage or the chance of us being hurt for no reason. When barely seeking help, two friends arguing. It's like we see all of those sorts of, issues and problems all the time. Someone sleeping on the bench. I would love to see that. So I think, thank you for giving us an outline of what our future could really be. I think we need to
shout out to whoever created that. Yes, yeah.
I love that message in general because especially living in LA or a big city, you see that there needs to be an incline in mental health services. I mean, the homeless population here is just astounding, and I just don't understand how there's not. Because I'm from Muskegon, Michigan. Yeah, we have homeless shelters, we have places that people can go, and it's very shocking to me that there's not just one huge facility in every county for homeless people to go to or a treatment center for them to go to. It's crazy to me. But yet we have $3 billion for the police to continue oppressing us and not doing their jobs.
And not doing any of those things. They're not trained in any of those things. De-escalation, crisis intervention, like support, fixing someone's life. They are not trained in anything that we actually need. They just escalate and instigate and take the money that we pay for their jobs. You know what I mean?
Facts.
Go ahead, Sadé.
Well, I was going to switch gears just a little bit. So I don't know if you had a question, a follow-up question.
No, go ahead.
Okay. Well, I just also wanted to kind of touch base with people who are unclear where Black Lives Matter and All Lives Matter lie. Because clearly what you've outlined for us is, a future where clearly all lives matter. You never mentioned race, color, background, or anything like that, where we, live in a place where everyone can get help. So where does Black Lives Matter and All Lives Matter live? Why is All Lives Matter so dismissive? We need to mark that out for people.
And it's interesting because I think now we're in a place where I think we're in a place too where when we talk about Black Lives Matter, we're talking about folks who are at the margins of the margins, right? Because this is a great question because I think like when I've been on the streets this last week and a lot of folks that I'm seeing that are in the National Guard uniforms, the military, the police are people of color, right? I've been seeing a lot of Black folks, a lot of we saw even with the murder of George Floyd, that lynching that we all saw, that Asian officer, Officer Tao, having his back turned and completely complicit, right? So I think this conversation around All Lives Matter and Black Lives Matter is getting a little more nuanced because I feel like we're moving into a place where when I was talking about how we've been taught to kind of, if we socially climb and get in closer proximity to power and whiteness, that things will be better. Even me in some of my spaces I've been, seeing folks make that climb, they forget why they're there. And so I think what we're seeing is more of, and like a lot of non-Black people on the streets too, but they understand that we're seeing a time where, yeah, do you know what I'm saying? It's a little bit more complex. Yeah. I feel like, we've heard this over and over again, but all lives can't matter until Black lives matter.
Mm-hmm.
Hello.
Can you even imagine if a viral video went like that of a white person being choked out? I'm just like, are we still having this conversation around all lives matter? And I think we need to be organizing everyone and having these conversations. And I think people need to be talking to their own communities. Like for me as a mixed Black person that's also perceived as Asian, I feel like it's really my duty, responsibility to talk to my Asian family, my Korean family that I still talk to. I've been having the same conversation with brown folks because all of us, racism is so insidious. It lives in our education. It's literally, it just lives in our bodies, And so all of us have a lot of unlearning to do, including Black people. We have a lot of healing to do. We've been taught to hate ourselves our whole lives, you know what I mean? And that generational trauma has been passed down. And so I think as Black people, we have to answer this question around, are we willing to show up for all of us? Not some of us that fit this like prescribed identity of what it means to be a good Black person. And I think we're seeing that narrative shift. We talk about this person was unarmed, this person was, not doing anything. But what if they were? Does that mean they deserve to die?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right? And so we have to complicate the conversation a little bit more. This idea of like good cop, bad cop, we have to complicate this idea of a Black person worth saving and the one that is disposable and deserves to be in a cage or deserves to be dead on the street.
White folks are walking around armed and fine.
Right.
Going home after,
Right.
shooting up churches.
Right.
Yeah.
Hey, Juan, I'm so happy you brought up that point because I've heard so many things, especially on Twitter, about George Floyd was on this drug, George Floyd was on that drug. And I'm just like, okay, but what is that? What did
How does that equate to
whoever? Yeah, even if a cop was on drugs, what did that have to do with them and their actions?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm saying? Because him being on drugs had nothing to do with how they were treating him.
Mm-hmm.
It was the color of his skin of how they were treating him. So
Right.
even I don't know what the facts are regarding that. I don't really care, in my opinion. But overall, you said that your end goal for this whole movement is did you say
abolishing the police, right?
Yeah, about
defund the police?
Defunding
Yes.
the police.
Defund the police.
Defund the police. Do you think that what do you think it's going to take to actually not stop, because this is something that's going to be ongoing, racism, unfortunately, in America? I feel like personally that it might be a decrease, hopefully, with what's going on, but I don't know if it's ever going to be over. But what do you think it's ultimately going to take for America to move on from this and kind of be able to move on to the next step?
Yeah, we have centuries of genocide and blood, and just a lot of this country has a lot of blood on its hands. So I think it's going to take us generations to heal and not even undo, because I don't know if we can undo. All we can do is try to heal and create something different, right? So I think we have to remember that this is not a sprint, it's a marathon. This is not a moment, it's a movement.
Mm-hmm.
We are in this place because of movements that came before us, and they're not separate. We're still in the fight, right? So I think we have to keep that mentality of like sustainability. I think there's three main things. One, we really have to build a multiracial movement. We really have to build, we have to connect our stories, because, I've been talking to my friends who are Filipino, all these folks, Korean, like, folks from Africa, and like my family's from Ethiopia, you know what I mean? So we have to connect our stories to how it has been impacted by US militarism, the US empire, and colonialism.
Mm-hmm.
Once we start to bridge our stories and our identities, we come together as a people, because it will take all of us. All of us deserve a better world. White, Black, brown, all of us deserve something better than this. We can create something better than this. I think the second thing is having an intersectional lens. We have to look at the intersections of racism, gender violence, capitalism, patriarchy, how all these things work together. Because if not, we're going to be fighting some form of oppression after this, right? If it's not Black men, it'll be Black trans women. If it's not Black trans women, it's going to be the folks inside cages. If it's not that, it's going to be disabled folks, right? So we have to be diligent in talking about, when we say Black Lives Matter, we mean all Black Lives Matter, and that will require us to have an intersectional lens. And really what that's going to do is a lot of healing. All these things that we've been taught, we have to undo, we have to connect, we have to, that auntie that you ignored because she just said something racist and you're just not even interested, we have to challenge those people. And not just with racism, transphobia, homophobia, xenophobia, anti-immigrant, all of these things, we have to talk about it all. And I think the last thing is we really have to listen to the young people, because they are the ones with the new ideas. You know what I mean? I think when we get older, I remember being a young person getting organized and my mom being like, I used to be like you when I was little, like a young activist. And I was like 15. I was like, never be that older person, like that you see yourself different than these young people. You remember that you were them fighting in the streets and you knew that you deserved better. You knew you could do better. You knew you could create something better. And so we have to center cultural change. We have to center young people and their imagination, their voices. Thank God for the mentors I had as a kid who just told me, hey, well, what does your ideal world look like? And it was a world without police and prisons. And they told me it was possible. They didn't tell me it was unrealistic. It wasn't going to happen. I had to dream smaller. They reminded me that. And I felt myself getting apathetic this last year, just, after seeing so much momentum after these. And what has reignited me is seeing all these young people on the streets, their signs, their chants, their pain. And so we have to let the young people lead. We have to support them. We have to tell them our ideas are possible. And we have to just trust. We have to trust them. So that's what I would leave folks with.
Girl, you better preach.
I was like, oh, take us to church. No, I loved everything you said. I think that's a perfect outline. Really to reprogram how we think and change our mentality and make sure that, continues with generations moving forward. You basically answered my last question. Blair, did you have any more questions for Haewon?
No. We touched on everything that I wanted to know. And I think she even brought up things that we didn't think of, even of what we want to see. Because I never really thought of having a team that we don't even need the police for. Never in my mind ever even thought about that. So you even opened up my eyes to some new ideas. So I appreciate you for even doing that.
Yes. And I feel like this is the work. This is what it's going to take for us to just share our stories, connect our histories, and build connection. And I feel like it's an exciting time to be alive, despite the pain and death. Like with change and transformation and taking down a system of oppression, it's going to be violent. And we have to normalize violence in that sense. Like the police have been hella violent. You know what I mean? So and we're being met with violence by them. So we just have to challenge these narratives, take back our stories. I'm not really on social media. I made my page private. I'm just posting what I see, sharing my thoughts, because we're not just in a battle with the police, but also the media. And so we're at spiritual warfare and we're in a battle of ideas, and we have to win the cultural battle.
Yes.
I think we should leave everybody with that, because you just said another word. You got bars for days, Haewon.
Haewon, where can people find you? Or if you said you're private, is there an organization or anything? Mm-hmm. Just put your stuff out there and advertise yourself or promote yourself.
Yes. So I'm part of the Black Lives Matter chapter in Los Angeles. I'm also part of a group called SUBAC, a group of radical Koreans doing anti-Black racism work, and also U.S. militarism work, anti-U.S. militarism work. And you can also find me on Instagram, _ Haewonton, HEYYWONTON.
Yes.
Love that. Thank you so much for, making the time to be able to speak with us on this, topic. It's very important. I know you are super busy with everything that's going on, but I think really having your light in some of the messages and just laying it out for folks is what, listeners and people need to hear. So we are so thankful to have you on.
Yeah, thank you for the opportunity. I'm excited to have this conversation with you. I'm excited it's happening, and I feel like what a time to be alive.
Change is coming. It's coming whether people like it or not. Well, you guys, this is Over the BS Show. Make sure you guys follow us, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.